Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Becky Hamber and Brandy Cooney. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the alleged crime, then offer my analysis. Becky Hamber and Brandy Cooney lived in Canada. The couple married in July 2014. They resided in a house at 505 Karen Drive in Burlington, Ontario. Becky graduated with a psychology degree and then ran a business from her home, claiming to be a behavior specialist. At one time, both women worked for a child care learning center. In October 2017, Becky and Brandy started caring for two Indigenous boys identified by the media only as LL and JL. At that time, LL was 6 years old and JL was 5 years old. The women were hoping to adopt them at some point. The boys were crown wards of the Children's Aid Society, otherwise known as CAS, and had been with other foster parents from 2013 to 2017. They had a history of severe behavioral problems. When the boys were under the care of Becky and Brandy, the women struggled to manage their defiant and disruptive behavior. Now moving to the timeline of the alleged crime. On December 21, 2022, at 7:26 p.m., Becky Hamber called 911 after Brandy found LL unresponsive in his basement bedroom. When paramedics arrived at the scene, they found 12-year-old LL in his basement bedroom lying in a pool of water. He was emaciated, cold, wearing a wetsuit, and appeared to be much younger based on his size, like 5 or 6 years old. LL had no vital signs, but there was no obvious sign of trauma. A police officer who responded to the scene described an overwhelming smell of vomit and urine. There was a camera mounted on a wall of the basement and a lock on the outside of the bedroom door. The police officer said the room contained a cot that, quote, you would not buy for a dog to sleep on, unquote. LL died later that night. Becky and Brandy were interviewed at a local police station. They said that LL had PTSD, oppositional defiant disorder, reactive attachment disorder, and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. He also had a condition that caused him to involuntarily regurgitate food, called rumination syndrome. Becky indicated that LL was locked in his bedroom due to safety concerns. So this was done to protect him. The women told officers that earlier in the night, LL had a smoothie in his basement bedroom. After this, he started screaming. Brandy discovered him full of vomit and yelled for Becky to call 911. An autopsy was performed on LL. It failed to identify his cause of death. Both hypothermia and cardiac arrest linked to malnourishment could not be ruled out as potential causes. On February 29, 2024, 45-year-old Becky Hamber and 43-year-old Brandy Cooney were charged with first-degree murder in connection with the death of LL. About a year earlier, in relation to his younger brother JL, the women had been charged with forcible confinement, assault with a weapon, and failing to provide the necessaries of life. It sounds like that last charge should contain the phrase necessities of life, not necessaries of life, but technically necessaries is the legally correct term in Canada. In September 2025, Becky and Brandy went on trial. At the time I'm making this video, the trial is underway. It is expected to conclude in the middle of November 2025. Now moving to my analysis. Becky Hamber and Brandy Cooney maintain their innocence, but do not appear to have many supporters. If they did have supporters, they might argue that there is no evidence the women committed first-degree murder. This might have been a terrible accident. Maybe they were not great foster parents, but that's a far cry from homicide. The Crown, of course, disagrees, arguing that the women despised LL and left him to die. This brings me to the question, are Becky and Brandy guilty of first-degree murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that they are guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. CAS said that Becky and Brandy were volatile and their emotions were dysregulated. LL and his brother JL were under the care of the women when LL died. A firefighter who responded to the scene indicated that Becky and Brandy were sitting on a couch in the basement looking at their phones and seemed uninterested in what was happening. A social worker named Stephanie provided psychotherapy to the boys for about a year, mostly focusing on their identity and who they wanted to be. She indicated that Becky and Brandy made the boys ask for permission to use the restroom and had zip-tied JL into his pajamas to prevent him from urinating on things when he became upset. Stephanie considered this to be a yellow flag and did not feel it was reportable or needed to be shared. LL's fourth grade teacher, Sarah Ferraro, said that on the first day of school, on September 3, 2019, LL had a communication book with him. In the book, there were warnings from Becky and Brandy suggesting that LL was manipulative, might try to steal food, and will make you feel sorry for him. Sarah was advised to send daily updates to the parents in this book, which must include negative observations. She felt as though there was nothing out of the ordinary with LL. He was wonderful, energetic, curious, an above-average reader, and well-liked by his peers and teachers. Sarah was concerned the negative comments were being used to punish LL, therefore she cut back on written feedback, not wanting to give Becky and Brandy any ammunition. The women had harsh rules for the boys to follow when they were in school. For example, they could not play with other children at recess, take books from the library, join extracurricular activities, use classroom computers, and they were not allowed to go on field trips. Becky and Brandy insisted that LL was at the level of a 2-year-old and once tried to lower his grade on a math test, something that Sarah had never seen before in her career. The women had an aggressive tone and made the teachers feel like they were always wrong. Sarah complained many times to the school administration, but no action was taken. JL had a second-grade teacher named Sarah Biasetti. He told her that his older brother LL had been locked in a basement. Sarah was told by a caseworker that, quote, "It's too political and that they need more evidence and more people to report," unquote. From October 2021 to July 2022, Brandy worked overnight at the Sunshine Donut Company. One of her coworkers, Leanne, referred to Brandy as toxic and negative. Brandy said that she locked the boys in their room for extended periods of time and complained that LL would break things, urinate on the floor, and run away. Leanne suggested that she return them to CAS. Brandy responded that she couldn't because that was her source of income. Leanne told Brandy, "These are children that you need to love and have patience. If they are just around for a source of income, you are going to have a lot of miserable years." Brandy responded, "That is what my wife is for." A month before LL died, text messages between the women revealed that Brandy found him in a distressed state. LL was shivering, had difficulty standing, was unable to speak English, and one of his eyes was described as wonky. The women questioned whether he was dying or had brain damage. Instead of calling for help, they gave him a blanket and dressed him in a wetsuit. Later, LL vomited and had a nosebleed. On December 13, 2022, just 8 days before LL died, a physician noted that he lost 10 pounds in 1 year and weighed less than he did at age 6. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. LL and JL had a lot of behavioral problems prior to being moved under the care of Becky and Brandy. For example, LL had a history of throwing tantrums, being deceptive, yelling, hitting, kicking, biting, and being very aggressive. One time he had threatened to kill his former foster mother and her family. On one occasion, LL mutilated and killed a steak. JL's school teacher, Sarah Biasetti, saw him engage in self-destructive behavior like headbanging, and he once punched her in the stomach when she was pregnant. On November 21, 2022, 1 month before LL died, Becky and Brandy expressed concerns to his physician about his weight and food intake. This indicates they were trying to help him. When this same physician saw LL 8 days before his death, he described him as normal. He made this assessment despite LL being emaciated, pale, having sunken cheeks, and hollowed-out eyes. The physician never asked LL about his eating. Becky and Brandy may have thought LL was fine because the physician did not seem alarmed. After all, he was the expert. Certainly, he would detect a problem if there was one there. It is true that LL died while under the care of Becky and Brandy, but his cause of death could never be determined. If the Crown doesn't know what killed him, how do they know the women were responsible for his death? When considering all the evidence that is available at the time I'm making this video, do I believe that Becky and Brandy were guilty of first-degree murder? I am not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that they are guilty of this charge. In my opinion, they are guilty of manslaughter because they demonstrated a reckless disregard for LL's safety. As far as the other charges like forcible confinement, I believe the women are guilty as charged. My opinion, of course, could change as new information becomes available in the trial. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. This tragedy was the result of 4 troubled individuals coming together. It was a recipe for disaster. On the one side, we have Becky and Brandy. They were described by various people as aggressive, erratic, controlling, bizarre, and emotionally dysregulated. Around the school, they were called the crazy moms. On the other side, we have LL and JL, 2 boys who had severe behavioral problems. They were aggressive, defiant, disruptive, incorrigible, and destructive. Anyone would have had difficulty managing their behavior. Becky and Brandy were willing to put up with the bad behavior because they wanted to get paid by the government. When the behavior became unmanageable, they resorted to punishment, confinement, and harsh restrictions. They were determined to dominate and control LL and JL in order to protect the flow of money. They never intended for LL to die. If they wanted to kill him, they would not have taken him to see a physician multiple times and warned this physician about his weight and food intake. This physician missed an opportunity to save LL's life. Many people who interacted with the boys knew their situation at home was not good. They realized that Becky and Brandy were causing harm. Unfortunately, the political climate discouraged intervention. People were fearful about coming forward because they would appear discriminatory. When complaints were made despite this fear, officials did not implement a remedy. The women's status as lesbians led to people looking the other way. Nobody wanted to seem like they were criticizing the women because it could be misinterpreted as an attack on their sexual orientation. Officials believed they were showing sensitivity, but what they were really showing was cowardice. Becky and Brandy used the political climate as a shield, but that shield failed catastrophically after there was a death. The lesson learned in this case is that life must be valued above political optics. Fear of appearing biased or offending people cannot excuse inaction. No one, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, should receive a pass to commit crimes. Pandering to any group at the expense of vulnerable individuals can lead to tragedy. Those are my thoughts in the case of Becky Hamber and Brandy Cooney. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.